Well, you're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor on KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM and on the web at www.kmud.org. We're also live streaming this program to our Western Botanical Medicine YouTube channel, so you can listen live right now on our channel by searching Western Botanical Medicine in the search bar on YouTube and click on the live stream. So let's see here, it's the 16th, right? 16th of May, 2025. We weren't here for March and April, but we're back. My name's Andrew Murray.
My name is Sarah Johannesen Murray. Thank you for joining tonight's talk show.
We're both licensed medical herbalists. We consult with clients about a wide range of conditions. Our website is westernbotanicalmedicine.com. You can also visit the site to see a list of our certified organic medicinal herb tinctures, and our contact details are there also. Alternatively, we can be reached on our toll-free number 1-888-WBM-HERB, and links to both our Twitter and YouTube channel are also on our website at westernbotanicalmedicine.com. So let's see here. I was just finishing up synergy. So substances that can synergize with other substances and make them more potential than the individual sum of the total, the sum of the ingredients. So we talked about capsaicin, chrysin, and curcumin. Okay, so the next topic I was going to cover, which is what we're going to look at this evening, for the next hour, is basically natural versus synthetic vitamins. There is going to be a segment here, as always, from 7:30 till the end of the show, where callers are invited to call in with about the subject, or if they have any other medical, questions or alternative medicine questions they want to, get answers for, or anything alternative that the show is basically centered on, either for the subject for tonight, which is the vitamins, synthetic versus non-synthetic, or any other herbal medicine or pathology type related questions. So essentially, are your vitamins, do you know where they're coming from? Do you know what's in it? Do you know what the process is that's created it? If you did, would you still use it? Why do you use vitamins? So whilst I was preparing the work for this subject, I kept on thinking about Dr. P. Everything that he'd ever really talked about was trying to be as ideal as possible. And that's a kind of open-ended term, ideal. What is the most ideal way of doing this? And so he really wasn't very big on substances per se, and he wasn't really that big on a lot of different herbs, because he would cite some herbs as being causing reactions in some people, or some herbs that, when we were studying herbal medicine, we were learning about phytoestrogens, for example. He was very anti-estrogen. I know that you could argue that phytoestrogens occupy the estrogen receptor, but elicit a very small response, whereas regular estrogen in the same receptor elicits a big response, and that phytoestrogens may have a place in treating, hormonal conditions, because they don't allow estrogen to sit in the receptor. But anyway, he wasn't that big on many different things, and he was as natural as you could really try to be, ideally, and still be effective. Okay, so when I was producing the material for this particular topic, natural versus synthetic vitamins, most of what was coming out was pretty much what he would describe as ideal foods, and all the things that he had mentioned kept coming up time and time again in the different vitamins that we're going to look at. So just want to cover some of the pros and the cons. Then we'll get into the subject of the contamination perspective of synthetics, and then I kind of dialed in on B12 as a kind of small subject for the discussion of vitamins, just because from its perspective of energy production, And the amount of seems to be increasing, the people that have MTHFR gene defects, and the whole cobalamin versus methylcobalamin debate. Yeah, it seemed like a fairly good place to start, but obviously vitamin A, D, E, and K, the fat soluble vitamins, are the ones that kind of most quickly roll off my tongue, followed by B, and then C. So we're going to cover those too, but I'm going to start off when I get into the vitamins after discussing some of their synthetic production with B12, and then kind of get back into the more normal ones of vitamin C. And then I got a piece to discuss here on Gates Foundation, not specifically anti-Gates, but I'm just basically discussing what he's funded and the implications for food, because we've heard about Franken foods, right, genetically modified. It's been going on for quite a while now, but back in the early 2000s, it was just starting up, and the Gates Foundation's basically poured ever increasing amounts of money into it. So natural vitamins then, there is definitely an argument for natural vitamins being more bioavailable. So that means essentially that they're more easily absorbed and utilized by the body than synthetic nutrients. Unlike artificial nutrients, food-derived vitamins are often bound to other organic compounds such as amino acids or trace minerals, and they act as a kind of essential cofactors. It's very much the same rationale for isolated phytochemicals versus the whole extract. So, for example, we just mentioned curcumin at the beginning of the show. Turmeric has plenty of other phytochemicals in it apart from curcumin. So just to say that there are cofactors and synergistic factors within whole products that certainly increase the potency and the availability, or they buffer any negative effects that can come from that, and that the whole rationale of isolated synthetics versus the raw material from which that synthetic or that isolate may have been pulled from as being inherently more ideal. There are instances, obviously, I'm not a purist. There are instances, of course, when there are some synthetic forms of certain things that I totally are on board with. So, I'm not putting a carte blanche bad case or worst case scenario for synthetics, but generally speaking, natural products naturally and organic. Been very big on organics from the very get-go. Yeah, well, I was going to get into a small additional segment to the global output, just to get an idea of how many metric tons of these particular vitamins, synthetic vitamins, are produced. But things like acetylene gas, right, which people probably know from welding, oxyacetylene. Acetylene is one of the building blocks of some of these vitamins, like the vitamin E. There are other chemicals that people probably won't, it won't trigger a memory for them because they're not that discussed. But some of the building blocks that they produce, either vitamin C or vitamin A or vitamin E from, are things that, quote unquote, would be toxic technically. You'd never, if you came into contact with these things, they could be classed as poisons. So vitamin E, for example, there's a 20-step process in the production of vitamin E. And again, most of the vitamins are coming out of China. 70% of the world's production of vitamin C comes out of China. So they have a pretty big market. In fact, the total global output for vitamins is 518,000 metric tons. All right, 500,000.
Is that all vitamins or just vitamin C?
No, that's all. And that's kind of grouping these vitamins and minerals. I mean, some of the minerals in the magnesium and potassium and stuff like that. So, but 518,000 metric tons. It's huge. I mean, okay. And a lot of this is added to, it's not just people that are consuming this. A lot of this goes into the animal farming business. whether it's cattle or hogs or poultry or, things that are raised en masse the way they are, get exposed to these things too. So it's not just people. And I would say that the argument is both the perspective of bioavailability, and the negative effects of some of these vitamins, because they are not, quote unquote, structurally similar to the naturally occurring vitamin. And whilst they may be chemically, by their name, they may have the same chemical formula, I think the inherent problem with them is that they are not naturally occurring, and therefore they are not going to be as good, and in most cases, they're probably causing reactions in people, or they're not facilitating, their intended use. So, as I mentioned, Dr. Pete was a purist, and I would say in his most the feature and the character about him that I take away from him and having spent time with him was that he always wanted to be as ideal as possible. So he mentioned all these foods, and we've heard him talk about them so many times. And I'm going to mention these same food sources as sources of these vitamins from the natural source.
Yeah, but just mentioning vitamin C, I want to mention that Dr. Pete would always mention that a lot of people are allergic to vitamin C, and that's because most of the vitamin C production is as a byproduct from corn syrup, and it's a very toxic process, and therefore people react to the vitamin C. So if people are getting odd symptoms from a vitamin they're taking, it's always good to take a supplement holiday and make sure it's not your vitamins that are making you sick.
Right. Now you're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor, KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM from 7:30 till the end of the show. You're invited to call in with questions. The number is 923-3911, area code 707. So 707-923-3911. Okay, so to move on to the subject of the natural versus the synthetic. So basically, synthetic vitamins are produced in isolation, and they lack the cofactors which significantly reduce their bioavailability. And this explains why supplements made with artificial nutrients often contain extremely high doses to compensate for the poor absorption of the ingredients. Now, many synthetic multivitamin supplements are made with a long list of ingredients such as artificial preservatives, sweeteners, bulking agents, food coloring, things to increase their shelf life and enhance color and texture, to improve flow rate in powders, and essentially things like vitamin A produced from acetone, vitamin C from keto acid. So these are just some of the examples of things that perhaps you never even really thought about. You think you're taking vitamin C, it's actually not even vitamin C in some cases, especially if it's citric acid or it's coming from ascorbic acid. Where these things naturally occur, they're not going to be, they're going to be certainly going to be more healthful.
Vitamin D is one that is very commonly produced from sheep's wool, lanolin.
Mm-hmm.
And so for meat eaters, they might not have a problem with that. But for vegetarians, there are vegetarian options for vitamin D where it will say from a vegan source. But mushrooms are a good natural source to get your vitamin D. Mm-hmm. Well-cooked mushrooms.
Which Dr. Pete always promoted well-cooked mushrooms, both for their aromatase blocking activity as well as any anti-cancer properties. Yeah. Under the exactly. Yep. Under the action of UV radiation, they produce more vitamin D. Okay.
But you must cook mushrooms very, very well in order to get the vitamins out, because they also have trace minerals. Like if we couldn't eat any seafood, mushrooms, just normal button mushrooms, normal white mushrooms or creminis, they do have a lot of trace minerals. But you have to cook and cook and cook because their fiber. It's a wonderful fiber, but the fiber holds a lot of the nutrients. So boiling, cooking, frying, boiling, cook.
All right, and another thing I think I can attest to from practice, seeing patients and seeing some, lab work, etc., to validate what it is they're talking about, is that it's often quite easy to overdose with synthetic vitamins, because not just because you can take more than they say, but typically some of the doses are quote unquote mega doses, and I think in the States probably more so than in Europe. There's this kind of sentiment of, well, why take 10,000 IU if you can take 50,000? Because these 50,000 and these 100,000 IU tablets are available, right? So it kind of puts it into the hand of somebody who thinks that more is better, and can also turn up with something like an excess symptom because they're taking too much of this and they're not really that aware of how much they should be taking, and let alone where the product's been manufactured from, what's created it. So just to say that synthetic vitamins, etc., with much larger than normal kind of concentrations of these things, can lead to what they call hypervitaminosis. So it's excessive levels of these vitamins in the body. Also, now people with kidney disease or liver disease can often have some impaired detox pathways and elimination pathways. And they're also at risk more from hypervitaminosis due to synthetic supplementation. Now, natural vitamins, on the other hand, are typically free of artificial coloring and preservatives, which in some individuals, as I mentioned, can trigger sensitivities and allergic reactions such as hives or rashes and nausea and GI upset.
Even things I've had clients where they start a vitamin and they'll start getting like an eye twitch, and like their eyelid twitches, and they hadn't had that before, and I'll say, well, why don't you stop that vitamin that you just started taking, and it goes away. So I mean, bizarre things like that can happen too. Headaches, skin rashes, like Andrew mentioned.
Okay, so I said at the beginning of the show, when we were going to kick off with the synthetic versus natural and looking at vitamins as a topic of discussion, to let people know where their vitamins come from, that vitamin B12 was kind of on the top of the list purely because there seems to be, and I've been contacted by increasingly more people with what's known as MTHFR, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase gene defects, and these people can't essentially can't methylate their cobalamin, so they have a B12 deficiency that you can treat with methylcobalamin because that's the active form that typically the gene would encode for, that conversion of cobalamin to methylcobalamin. But just to say that B12 as an intrinsic factor for energy production and general kind of neuron functioning and cognitive functioning, and that kind of, the B's are kind of nervous. If you think about the nervous system, you think of the B vitamins, right? So starting off with B12 then. So foods that contain vitamin B12, and this is cobalamin. There's two other types of B12 that we'll go through, but basically animal meat, and obviously for those kind of vegetarians out there, and absolutely your choice, to be vegetarian, but eggs and dairy for people that don't mind drinking milk, but animal meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. Some of the main problems with not getting adequate B12 can be pregnant women and or nursing women, and these
brewer's yeast also.
Yeah, yeast.
Even though it's estrogenic, it is a
Right.
source of B vitamin. So
Right. So yes, I think there are. Yeah. So it's water soluble. You've got the fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. The rest typically are water soluble, and they have many different functions in the body. So as I mentioned, things like healthy nerves, supporting DNA production, red blood cells, and maintaining brain function. These are kind of what we typically think about when we think about B and B12. So the reference daily intake here is 2.5 micrograms. It's pretty small, but slightly higher for those pregnant and nursing. And vitamin B12 is kind of very interesting because it's absorbed in the stomach, but it needs the help of a protein called intrinsic factor. So intrinsic factor is produced by the parietal cells in the stomach, and the substance binds to the vitamin B12 molecule and helps basically your blood and your cells to absorb it. Now, pernicious anemia was something that we, when we did our differential diagnosis and pathology and stuff, is one of those things that came up with the anemia, is a macrocytic or the microcytic anemias and then megaloblastic anemias, blah, blah, blah. So this is a megaloblastic anemia. So the whole membrane of the red cell just has to it gets much bigger because there's not sufficient B12 in circulation. It's called pernicious anemia. Excess B12 is stored in the liver. So if you consume more than you need, you can. So we talk about being water soluble, but actually it's stored in the liver, and the liver is an excellent source of vitamins in general. So although it's water soluble and it is excreted in the urine, and it's not stored in the fat cells that we think typically are those things that we have a supply of, B12 is actually stored in the liver. So you can go a while without it, any food sources of it, before you would become deficient in it.
And while we're mentioning food sources of B vitamins, of course, liver is king on the amount. The king. It's definitely the king of B vitamin for natural food sources of B vitamins.
Okay, so organ meats then. Yeah, talking about the liver and kidneys. Both of these organs are packed with this vitamin. So lamb liver, they say, is generally higher in B12, and then beef and veal livers would be next. And Dr. Pete was a big advocate of liver. So I started looking at these different sources, and I'm like, okay, yeah, he was really promoting that. He was really promoting this, and he was really promoting that. Oh, wow, these are all the things that he talked about, as foods that we should be eating to get what we need from. Okay, so...
And chicken liver, although chicken liver is lower in B vitamins than lamb liver. Lamb liver tastes better.
So lambs, on that subject, then lamb's liver is also very high in copper, selenium, and vitamin A and B2. So whilst liver, I think, has just about every vitamin in it, it's slightly higher in copper, selenium, and A and B2. Okay, so clams, the next B12 source here. So these are chewy little shellfish that Dr. Pete would always talk about, clam chowder and
oysters.
Same with oysters
and mussels.
Oyster stews and mussels. So very high concentrations of B12 in clams. You can also get quite a lot of iron in them too. So for those people perhaps who don't want too much iron, then it may not be such a good source. So clams and then sardines. Okay, and whilst I know also that if you look around, you'll find things like salmon and trout on the list. The whole fish issue is the omega-3s, and so I didn't want to bring out too many fish as a source because typically we're not really supporting those kind of polyunsaturates, because you can get adequate amounts of these nutrients from other sources. So anyway, sardines, an interesting point about sardines is they contain probably the most bioavailable calcium out of any other food. So that was quite interesting, because having done shows in the past here on osteoporosis and osteopenia, I know we always advocate taking ground eggshells as a good source of calcium, but it can be disturbing to some people's stomachs, and sardines are actually an excellent bioavailable source of calcium.
Only if you eat the bone
Of course,
in, because there are but there are cans. You can buy cans of sardines that say boneless and skinless. So it's good to eat skinless, because then you get less of the heavy metals in the fish, as well as the inflammatory mercury, cadmium, lead. And we've tested fish, by the way, and it has very high levels of mercury, cadmium, lead, and arsenic compared to land animals. But the other thing about sardines that makes them a little bit safer is that they're smaller fish, so they're going to have less of the heavy metals because they're lower down on the food chain.
So now when I looked at sardines, essentially here's a rundown of what they do contain. It sounds a little bit like liver, but I think it's from the perspective of being the entire animal. So, so basically B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B12, A, C, K, and D, and folate, and then of course the calcium. So quite an amazing array of vitamins that sardines contain just on their own, and I don't think they're particularly high in polyunsaturates, unlike things like salmon and tuna. Okay, and then beef. Obviously, we think about the red meats, as a source of B12. Okay, so a single flat iron steak, about 190 grams, provides nearly 500% of the daily recommended quantity of vitamin B12. Okay, and also, contains B2, B3, and B6, and selenium and zinc too. Okay, so that's the kind of the meats, and then yeah, talked about sardines. Trout came up too, but don't want to talk too much about trout because it's not that necessary, I don't think. And then milk and other dairy products such as yogurt and cheese, great protein sources as well as including B12. So cheese and full-fat yogurt, and yeah, it's an interesting little research paper here that I read. Showed that your body absorbs B12 in milk and dairy products better than the B12 in beef, fish, or eggs. So again, I kept thinking Dr. Pete, Dr. Pete, Dr. Pete was such a big advocate for milk. But yeah, so the B12 in milk is more bioavailable than the B12 in beef, fish, or eggs. Okay, and then just to talk about eggs quickly, great source of protein and B vitamins, especially B2 and B12. Okay, you're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor, KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM from now, almost, yeah, now until the end of the show. You're invited to call in the questions. Number 707-923-3911. Okay, so egg yolks then, definitely different from the egg white, but the yolks contain higher levels of B12 than the whites, and the yolks are easy to absorb. And it's recommended to eat whole eggs instead of just the whites anyway. So, other sources, B12 here, things like salmon, but again, one of the highest concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids. It should be limited, and same with tuna with its heavy metal burden, should also be limited. And then there's fortified cereals and fortified yeast, but they're not natural sources, so I wouldn't typically recommend them. Now, you may develop a B12 deficiency if your body doesn't produce enough intrinsic factor, or if you don't eat enough vitamin B12 rich foods. As I said, it's termed pernicious anemia when the parietal cells of the gastric lining are attacked in an autoimmune fashion, leading to impaired absorption of B12, leading to what's termed megaloblastic anemia and other systemic effects due to B12 deficiency, as opposed to a B12 deficiency due to an MTHFR gene defect, for which methylated B12 would be indicated for optimal function. Now, while they can absorb B12, their ability to use it effectively is impaired, potentially leading to neurological symptoms like fatigue and poor detoxification. So from a laboratory point of view, from seeing people and also seeing lab work, in pernicious anemia, as opposed to MTHFR mutation as a reason for defective B12 absorption or quantities in circulation, people with pernicious anemia, they have low B12 despite adequate intakes. They also have elevated methylmalonic acid and homocysteine, and they have what's termed a macrocytic anemia. So their mean corpuscular volume typically is over 100. And they have positive intrinsic factor or parietal cell antibodies. So these are antibodies that are directly attacking the reason that they would normally be able to produce it. And then typically also they have low or even absent gastric acid, so they have achlorhydria. So that's with pernicious anemia, but if you had pernicious anemia, you'd know it pretty quickly. Now, the MTHFR mutation, depending on how severe it is, can present itself fairly slowly over a fairly long course of time, or if you have, double gene deletions for this, you can certainly, you find out a little bit quicker. But their B12 levels might actually be normal or even high. But homocysteine might be elevated due to impaired methylation, and the methylmalonic acid may or may not be elevated depending on the actual B12 deficiency, and they don't have intrinsic factor or parietal cell antibodies. So, in terms of a treatment approach, just to quickly cover this, pernicious anemia, where it's an autoimmune antibody-mediated direct attack. These people need lifelong supplementation with injections, typically bypassing the gut, or high-dose sublingual or transdermal patches, etc., to compensate for lack of absorption. Now, methylcobalamin, as we've mentioned, or hydroxycobalamin are preferred over cyanocobalamin. And then for people with an MTHFR mutation, they require the methylated form, the methylcobalamin, and there is also an adenosylcobalamin form of B12, and this bypasses the impaired methylation pathway. Now, again, either orally, sublingually, or transdermally, B12 is typically sufficient, and the absorption is not the issue typically. And then the other thing is you may also need active folate. So there is a 5-methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, or methylene tetrahydrofolate is the active form of the active folate, and that can support also the methylation cycle. Go ahead. Yeah. Do we have a caller? Yeah, okay. Hi caller, you're on the air. Where are you from and what's your question? No. Potassium is elemental nomenclature on a chart is K, but vitamin K is menotetranone and 2 other forms of it, active K1, K2, and K3, and it's really the thing that inherently controls clotting, something that can be found in relatively good quantities in dark green leafy veg and that kind of thing. But I'm going to cover that a little later when we get into the other vitamins.
So,
yeah.
Right, so the caller, can you please repeat the caller's question, because anyone live streaming this program won't be able to hear the caller's questions because the audio is not working. In the studio, we're just using the laptop audio from the microphone.
We're going to have to do this every time?
Well, hopefully I'll be able to get this sorted out.
Okay. All right. Well, the caller was asking if vitamin K was the same as potassium, and that's because the periodic table lists potassium by the letter K. So maybe they were thinking that was the same, but they're very different. Okay. All right. So key takeaway. Oh, okay. Yep. Hi caller, you're on the air. Where are you from? What's your question? Was on the air. Okay. We're live, and from now until 8 o'clock, the end of the show, callers are invited to call in with questions either related to the synthetic versus natural vitamin discussion that we're having, or any other questions on herbal medicines, and alternative medicine treatments. Our number is 707-923-3911. That's 707-923-3911. Hey caller, you're on the air. Where are you from? What's your question? Okay. We didn't hear that first thing. What was that?
The caller is asking if your gut flora,
right.
contains, well, actually, your gut flora can manufacture vitamins.
Yeah, well, Mhm. All right. Well, I appreciate your call. There's definitely a difference between the quote unquote medical understanding of B12 absorption in the in small intestine and the rationale of people not being B12 deficient, because I've seen lots of people who are B12 deficient and lots of people who have gene defects that do not allow them to manufacture the manufacture the methylcobalamin from cobalamin.
But in general, because chai tea has that traditional this, so our live streamers on YouTube wouldn't have heard that caller's comment on chai tea and how traditionally when you boil the milk, because milk has a vitamin B vitamins in it as well, B12. So when you boil the milk and you make the traditional process, you're going to be getting uh, B vitamins and other vitamins from that. It's a very traditional, wonderful product, chai tea. Has spices, right?
Sure, nutmeg and cinnamon and yeah, all the rest of it. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, and all of that combined with milk, it's it's a beautiful food, and yeah, it does boiling it does make it a little bit easier for everybody to digest. There is some destruction of some of the nutrients in milk when you boil it. That's why raw milk is obviously the most nutritious, and UHT, which is basically boiled milk, has slightly lower quantities. But if you're drinking a lot of it, then you compensate that way. So thank you for the comment about chai tea. I love chai tea as well.
So do I. Okay, the number if you're in the area or out the area or anywhere in the world is 707-923-3911. I'd love to hear your comments or your calls. And carrying on with the whole vitamin synthetic versus natural, excuse me, I think the whole thing has probably never been so clouded and muddied and disorientated as vitamin C. So, excuse me, ascorbic acid, the synthetic form of vitamin C, is significantly less effective than its natural form and doesn't contain the same range of phytonutrients and cofactors as natural sources of vitamin C, such as citrus fruits or acerola cherries, for example. So what makes vitamin C unique is that there are many different types of chemicals, all generically called vitamin C. This is where people need to be careful. So the reason we know that they're different is only because of the CAS number. So if you're into chemistry and you're into, looking at different drugs in pharmaceuticals, there's a registry, a huge national, well, worldwide registry. So these CAS numbers will mean the same thing in whatever country you go to. So it's basically a way of identifying all of these things, right? So if you're in Pakistan, it's called, it's got a CAS 50817, for example. If you go to China, that same 50817 will be exactly known by them because it's on a national registry. So the CAS number is designated for each individual substance. So whatever the substance is, it's not a mixture of substances, but individual chemicals. Now, so as I said, it's assigned by the Chemical Abstract Service, so the CAS service, to every chemical substance described in open scientific literature in order to index the substance in the CAS registry. Now, in theory, this means that there should be no confusion over which chemical is which, because you can use the CAS number for clarity, right? That's why it's been developed. So just to give you an example of how people can be fooled, and this is why, in this country, when I first came here in 2000, I was kind of surprised that there was no real labeling of food, right? In England, when I came here, for those first 30-something years, everything in the supermarket, you'd just turn the thing over and you could just see exactly what was in it. The ingredient list, it would always start with the first ingredient would be the highest concentration down to the last ingredient, which was the lowest concentration. And you saw everything that was made or put together to make that thing that you were buying. It came to the States and nothing was labeled. Well, you could see what maybe fat content, maybe, or carbohydrate or sugars were in it, but you couldn't see the ingredients.
No, ingredients have been on the labels for many years. So what exactly are you?
Oh, hang on. I'm thinking that the disclosure of these different foods was not as obvious as it was in Europe.
Well, maybe there's hidden ingredients like in wine and beer. They don't have to list all the ingredients. There could be 200 different processing agents used to make wine, and they list none of that on the label. But they don't in Europe either.
Hmm. I thought the packaging and the ingredient labels were very much less detailed than they were in England. Huh. All right. Well, anyway, let's not argue that. Maybe it's not my memory thinking it was different then. I know now, definitely, and again, it's not from a political perspective to popularize it, but this incoming administration and RFK definitely want to increase labeling. So that is something that obviously has been deficient and something they're addressing. So
Well, and the banning of the artificial colors, which is just so delightful.
Mhm.
That's just absolutely one. We don't need these petroleum-based artificial colors in our food.
Okay, so
It's been way too long. It's been banned in Europe for ages.
So getting back to vitamin C, then let's just give you an example here of five different compounds here that if you heard it, you might think it's vitamin C until we get to the one that is. Okay, so vitamin C powder then, also known as ascorbic acid powder or L positive negative ascorbic acid, and just vitamin C. So vitamin C powder has a CAS number of 50817. So now chemical number 2, the next type of synthetic vitamin C is ethyl ascorbic acid, also known as vitamin C, but it bears the same CAS number as ascorbic acid powder, 50817. So it should be the same. Chemical number 3, there's ferrous ascorbate, also known as vitamin C, as well as plus iron 2 L-ascorbate crystalline. Now this ferrous ascorbate has a different CAS number. I won't read it out, but it's not the same as the previous ones. But it's also commonly known as vitamin C. Now chemical number 4, there's sodium ascorbate, which is also called L-ascorbic acid sodium salt, as well as vitamin C sodium salt, and just vitamin C, but it has a different CAS number. Now, according to the MSDS, this compound shouldn't even be used as a food or drug. And then chemical 5, one that we probably all heard more of, is citric acid, which doesn't even contain vitamin C anymore. It hasn't contained vitamin C since the early 1900s. And it doesn't currently contain vitamin C because although it used to be made from lemons, the manufacturers realized they could save money by making it from black mold and GMO sugar. Okay, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? But we'll get into the whole aspergillosis and GMO sugar and how they've made that. But due to the name, people still believe it's fruit-based. Okay, so the natural process involves...
And that's another reason why people are allergic to citric acid. I'm allergic to citric acid if it's from that source. If it's from orange juice, I'm totally fine with it. If it's from another source, like in a food, I will break out in little mouth ulcers inside my mouth because it's coming from an allergic mold.
So the natural process involves, vitamin C production involves the extraction of citric acid from citrus plants like oranges, limes, lemons, whereas in the synthetic method, citric acid is produced by 2 approaches. That is the chemical approach of citric acid synthesis with the use of enzymes, and then a biological approach involving fermentation by the use of microorganisms like bacteria, yeast, etc. Okay, I think there's another caller on the air. Let's take this caller. Caller, you on the air? Where are you from? What's your question? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think so particularly. I think those foods that are fortified, it depends on how much you're eating of them. But
They can be. Okay, so I just want to repeat the question or the comment
mm,
from James from Arizona. He was asking if people that are on the spectrum with the MTHFR, COMT methylation defect, if they're being poisoned by B vitamins, because it's not just
fully.
one, there's several B vitamins that you should be very careful with supplementing with if you have a methylation defect. So uh, I I don't know if they put enough in food to cause a real big problem, but I definitely think with supplementation, too much
Then it can be. Yeah.
niacin, niacinamide, B1, thiamine, you can have problems if you have a poor methylation or a methylation defect. How would you know you have problems? Maybe you probably just wouldn't feel well on them,
You'd be
and your
sluggish.
levels in your blood might also be elevated for some of those B vitamins. And I know, there's a lot of different viewpoints on whether you should have, 12,000 times more the B12 in your blood than is in the lab value. And some people say, oh, you should because the studies have shown that if you have 12,000 times more, it's better for you. But I think it needs more research, and I obviously need to um, look into that a lot more to be able to determine what level is the right level for people with methylation defects. But it is recommended that people that do have this is a science I have looked into, that people with methylation defects should be very careful when supplementing with B vitamins,
Right.
especially B1, B3, and B12.
Hmm. Hmm. I think. Yeah, I think the subject of chronic alcoholism probably also relates in part to that kind of lack of self nutrition. I think when most people become chronic alcoholics, they drink a lot of alcohol, not just the inflammatory effects of the stomach and the intestines that can happen with large amounts of ethanol, but most people tend not to generally eat well. And it's just a kind of broad, blanket statement about alcoholics, but they generally don't take care of themselves because they are drinking copious amounts of beer or wine or spirits.
Besides the effect of liver
Well, that
slowing,
too,
I
yeah.
mean, the alcohol slowing the liver's metabolism, and if the liver stores the B vitamins, then it's very important to, make sure your liver is functioning well in order to keep all of your A, D, E, and K that's in liver, as well as your B vitamins. So I think there's probably a multi-pronged reason why alcoholics have that problem.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
for your call, James. You have a good night too.
Okay, I wanted to quickly switch gears here to some of the work, excuse me, some of the work done by Bill Gates and his foundations, and um, how the quote unquote altruistic outpouring has inadvertently steered itself into question about what actually is being produced and what is actually the end result of this. So in 1999, the Gates Foundation donated. So just get an idea of the timeline. Okay, I'm going to go from 1999 to 2023. So just think of the year and then think of the money. So in 1999, the Gates Foundation donated $5 million to the PATH program, the program for appropriate technology in health to advance the development of ultra rice. Okay, now think about the whole GMO thing and what that means worldwide in terms of production and money. A genetically modified fortified rice produced in at least 5 developing countries. So that's 99. In 2000, Bill Gates embarked on a $20 million journey to learn more about synthetic vitamins, the Gates Vitamin Research. It paid off. Now, clearly the industry is profitable, so he buys almost 6 million shares of Pfizer stock in 2002. Also in 2002, a Wall Street Journal article titled "Gates Fights Malnutrition with Cheese, Ketchup and Other Fortified Food Items" described an international consortium led by Bill Gates' charitable foundation planned to address malnutrition around the world by offering economic incentives to Kraft, Procter & Gamble, and other food companies to bring fortified processed foods and food commodities to impoverished nations. Now, in exchange, the consortium, called the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, or GAIN, would offer companies assistance in lobbying for favorable tariffs and tax rates and speedier regulatory review of new products in targeted countries. The consortium also would give local governments money for initiatives to help create demand for fortified foods, including large-scale public relations campaigns or a governmental seal of approval. The United Nations pledged $70 million to have vitamin supplements added to staple foods. The Gates Foundation then threw in another $50 million because it's imperative that people get the chemical nutrients they need. Now, the following year, Gates was under fire for donating a minimum of $25 million to research genetically modified foods and to add vitamins and nutrients to them. The foods that Gates wanted to be more nutritious include crops such as beans, wheat, rice, corn, and potatoes. At the time, people didn't want their food tampered with, so they were outraged. 2005, Gates is pushing the genetically modified crops in Africa. 2006, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition received $20 million from the Gates Foundation to ensure foods will be fortified with vitamins. And in 2009, at the World Food Symposium, Gates announced 9 grants totaling about $120 million for farmers in Africa so they can plant biotechnologies. That means GMO-laced vitamin crops. In 2011, Gates wanted to modify fresh produce to add more vitamins to them, like iron and vitamin A to bananas, quoting they're one of the best weaning foods for babies, coming in nice sterile packages and they don't need to be cooked. In 2021, then, moving on, the Gates Foundation announced a commitment of $922 million over the next 5 years to address global nutrition. The grant will add vitamins to salt, flour, and cooking oil and other staple foods in developing nations because we all need it. Now, if you want to just quickly get your head around what is currently genetically modified, I'm switching the subject from synthetic vitamins to GMO because GMOs are being, they're producing vitamins now, folks, and they're being fed to the developing nations and they're producing multi-million-dollar businesses.
So now we need to make sure our vitamins and supplements say non-GMO?
Well, definitely. Okay, so the list of bioengineered foods currently on the USDA website that are listing these things: alfalfa, Arctic apples, canola oil, corn oil, cotton.
And cotton, therefore cottonseed oil.
Yeah, BT-resistant eggplant. Okay, virus-resistant papaya. Pink-fleshed pineapple. There's certain potatoes. There's a Aqua Advantage salmon, soybean, summer squash, for crying out loud, sugar beet, of course, because it's a pretty big crop, and sugar cane. And the list is maintained by the USDA and is updated regularly to reflect the new bioengineered products. I don't know how much people want to voice a concern with these things, and I don't want to be alarmist or anything, but in terms of natural and organic, these are not natural and they're not organic. And if you want to be healthy, then have a good look at what ingredients are in your food and where these vitamins are coming from and what foods are now being fortified with these vitamins because we're all so deficient in them that we need them. Anyway. Just very quickly, natural vitamin A then from retinol from animal products, but then obviously the carotenoids from the plant-based products is converted to vitamin A. Natural vitamin D from fatty fish, although we're not really big on fatty fish because of the PUFA content, but you know, salmon, mackerel, sardines, but then obviously egg yolks, beef, liver, some mushrooms, especially when exposed to UV light. And then natural vitamin K from green leafy veg, kale, spinach, collards, liver, natural B vitamins from meat, fish, poultry, eggs, dairy, leafy greens, nuts, grains, and then natural vitamin C, of course, from citrus, strawberries, bell peppers, broccoli, and tomatoes. So all of these vitamins that people may or may not feel that they need supplementation with is all available in vegetable form, vegetable or animal product form, without real exception. So I would just say be cautious with vitamins that you supplement with. Do you really need it, number one? Number two, how is it being manufactured? Is it a synthetic version of a vitamin that you might want to look at and do your research on to see how it's being produced? And or is it natural? So China is probably 70% of the world production of vitamin C, and I think it's up there with most of the other vitamins too. Not to say that China is a terrible country, we shouldn't buy anything from China. It's just saying that they have been given this opportunity to manufacture these things, and actually I wonder that people really need them. So anyway, that's
and this is not even to mention all the additives that get put into
right.
supplements and vitamins, the titanium dioxide, the silica, the magnesium stearate, all of these things that are intestinal irritants that Dr. Pete was regularly going on about how irritating and how damaging and inflammatory they are. So eat good food, organic food.
Okay, so you've been listening to Ask Your Doctor on KMUD Galveston 91.1. Tonight's show was a discussion of synthetic versus natural vitamins. My name's Andrew Murray.
My name's Sarah Johannesen Murray. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we're both licensed medical herbalists. We consult with clients about a wide range of conditions. Our website is westernbotanicalmedicine.com, and we can be reached 1-888-WBM-HERB, and our YouTube and Twitter handle is @WBM-HERB, and go online, go check us out. Until June, the third Friday of June, we'll see you then.
Thank you for listening. Have a good night.